The Making of the Modern World, Part 1. Table of Contents.
Narration by Dr. Sidney Soclof,
Zoe Phonemes,
and Nathan Koltove. For a complete discussion of YouTube navigation, please go to tiny.1/ytnavigator. The Making of the Modern World. Did you vote today?
I didn't know that there was an election today.
There is an election every day. All day long. Almost every moment of the day.
Almost everything you do. Almost every day is a vote. Not a political vote, but an economic vote, an important signal or message. How so?
Everything you buy. Every place you go. Everything you use in a type of voting, but not a political vote.
Even turning on a light switch, or switching a channel on a TV, or driving any place is a type of vote.
These are individual choices, but also can be considered to be important economic messages, or votes, and play an essential role in shaping our modern world.
When you go shopping, you are voting by what stores you go to,
In what you buy.
even when you get up in the morning. You are voting when you turn on the lights, or open the refrigerator, or adjust the temperature, or turn on the water, or take a shower. All of these represent small incremental purchases you make of electricity, gas, and water.
The programs you watch or listen to on radio and TV are also votes.
Where you are now living, the house, the street, and the state, are all votes in terms of the various taxes, fees, and assessments you pay.
These votes are important economic messages that influence the production of goods and services, and are an essential element of modern life and the productivity of the Industrial Revolution.
The essential elements of this are customer demands, that is votes, and the ability to produce the goods and services. This is the demand side of the modern world.
This in turn requires capital investment, suitable materials, the ability to make the product, and the idea, concept, improvement, or invention of the product. This is the supply side of the modern world.
These are three key factors for our discussion of the making of the modern world.
How so?
Why Coke? What is Coke? Is it Coca-Cola? Or cocaine? Or something else entirely?
Why boring? What is boring?
Outline.
Part 1, The Beginnings. Introduction. Before the Industrial Revolution, Neolithic Revolution, the First Agricultural Revolution, the Second Agricultural Revolution.
Part 2, Steam Power. Early steam engines, before Watt. Later steam engines, Watt and after. Steam power for factories, steamboats and steamships, steam locomotives and railroads, and steam turbines.
Part 3, Iron and Steel. Abraham Darby and Coke. Coalbrookdale and the Iron Bridge Gorge. Henry Bessemer and Steel. Andrew Carnegie and the U.S. Steel Corporation.
Part 4, Textiles. The cotton gin. The spinning jenny. Weaving machines. Water power and the factory system. The application of steam power. American textiles. Slater and Lowell.
Part 5, The Information Age. The Second Industrial Revolution. The Information Age. Telegraphy. Telephone and radio. Computer and industrial automation. The future in summary. The making of the modern world.
For many thousands of years, things did not change much at all. Then, around 200 years ago, things started to change at an increasingly rapid rate. And today we have the amazing modern world with changes happening almost every day.
Everything you have, see, or do every moment of your waking day is a result of this. We will learn how, why, when, and where this all came about, and the challenges it poses for us today, including concerns about pollution and global warming.
In fact, you probably wouldn't be here to hear, see, or do anything due to the ravages of a high infant mortality, disease, wars, and famine. And if you do survive, it might be with poor health due to lack of teeth, poor vision due to myopia or cataracts, lack of mobility, and other ailments.
What is meant by the modern world? This simplest definition that we will use is that is the now. The world of today. What we have both materially, as well as politically, the rights and freedoms, and the full range of opportunities.
This graph illustrates the very rapid growth of technology and population in the past 200 years. What do we mean by the modern world, and when we say before the modern world?
We will use the expression the olden days to refer to the time before the modern world.
The olden days actually extends throughout almost all of human history. Many millennia. Back many thousands of years.
The modern world is really only a very tiny fraction of all of human history. Just a couple of hundred years at most.
The modern world had its very start only around the 1700s. And the 19th century between 1800 and 1900 was a transitional period when new ideas, inventions, and innovations started to appear.
The early modern world of the 20th century between 1900 and 2000 was a period when the new technology with telephone, radio, TV, microwaves, air conditioning, airplanes, and so much more started to become commonplace.
Finally, we are now in the modern world of today, in the 21st century, in which we live in a vast and all-encompassing world of technology.
We will look at the who, what, why, when, and where this momentous change occurred.
What is needed for a new invention to really succeed are the idea, the ability to make, and the possibility of making a profit.
The idea comes first. But most ideas simply vanish because they are impractical. Can be made. There will be no financial gain. Or many other reasons.
The ability to make is crucial. Many ideas come before their time, when practical implementation is simply not possible.
An example of this is the steam engine. Hero of Alexandria had the idea 2,000 years ago and built a simple example, but it was an idea way before its time. And didn't see a practical realization until 1,700 years later.
The ability to make depends on resources. In terms of natural resources like coal and iron, and human resources, like skilled craftsmen and machinists.
The ability to make also depends on the availability of investment capital to finance the project, this in spite of the uncertainty as to whether it will be a success.
The possibility of making a profit or return on investment is a key factor in the success of any invention or innovation. This depends on several factors, including demand by the public,
The possibility of making a profit or return on investment is also dependent on the protection of patents and property rights, enforcement of contracts, and the freedom of the marketplace. The modern world depends on power. Power to make things. Power to do things. Power to transport things and people. And power to inform and entertain us.
For most of human history, it was human muscle and mind power. And for the last 5 or 10,000 years, it was supplemented by animal power. Where do we get our power from?
That is the power to run our factories and offices.
And the many appliances and electronic devices in our homes.
And the power for transportation with automobiles, trucks, trains, ships, and airplanes.
Almost all mechanical power has its ultimate source in heat engines, or to use an older term, fire engines.
Heat produces mechanical power.
This mechanical power results in great increases in productivity.
This mechanical power produces faster travel by trains, ships, automobiles, and airplanes.
The mechanical power is used to generate electricity to power lights, telephones, movies, radio, TV, computers, and many other things for both productivity and entertainment.
Almost all power comes from the pressure exerted by hot gases, most commonly steam. The power of steam was known since ancient times.
In most cases, the heat energy comes from the combustion of fossil fuels, coal, oil, or natural gas.
In a nuclear power plant, the heat is produced in a nuclear reactor. Even hydroelectric and wind power ultimately comes from a heat source, the sun.
For hydro, it is the solar energy that causes evaporation of the ocean waters. The water vapor rises to form clouds, and then rainfall results in the flow of water from higher land elevations downward through turbines in dams.
In the case of wind power, it is the uneven heating of the earth by the sun that produces the wind currents that drive the wind turbines.
Only in the special case of solar cell, or photovoltaic power, is heat energy not involved.
Hero's aerofoil was a nice thing, but it operated by the force produced by a jet of steam and generated very little usable power. What was needed for really usable power was a tight-fitting piston in a cylinder.
Heat is manifested by the random movement of molecules in a gas. This is the kinetic energy of the gas molecules. The molecules move in all directions randomly.
In order to tap into this energy, it's necessary to have this kinetic energy push on something in just one direction.
The first practical steam engines used atmospheric pressure. The condensation of steam in a cylinder produces a vacuum. The air pressure on the other side of the piston produced a force that drove the piston down.
Cylinders. What shape is best for withstanding pressure without deforming its shape?
Cylinders. What shape can be machined most precisely?
How could a strong cylinder that could withstand high temperatures and pressures and maintain its shape be made in pre-modern times? This is a story about how the modern world came to be. It is a story about what came to be called the Industrial Revolution, although I prefer the more inclusive term productivity revolution.
This is also a boring story. But certainly not boring in the sense of not being interesting,
but rather in the seemingly mundane sense of the mechanical action of boring out a cylinder. As we shall see. This seemingly simple task played a critical role in our story.
It was the ability to produce accurately round cylinders that could withstand high temperatures and pressures.
The Industrial Revolution and the birth of the modern world.
During the 1700s and early 1800s, great changes took place in the lives and work of people in several parts of the world. These changes resulted from the development of industrialization. The term Industrial Revolution refers both to the changes that occurred and to the period itself.
The Industrial Revolution began in Great Britain during the 1700s. It then spread to other parts of Europe and to North America in the early 1800s. By the mid-1800s, industrialization had become widespread in Western Europe and the northeastern U.S.
The Industrial Revolution created an enormous increase in the production of many kinds of goods. Some of this increase in production resulted from the introduction of power-driven machinery and the development of the factory organization.
Before the revolution, manufacturing was done by hand or simple machines. Most people worked at home in rural areas. A few worked in shops in towns as part of associations called guilds.
The Industrial Revolution eventually took manufacturing out of the home and workshop. Power-driven machines replaced hand work, and factories developed as the best way of bringing together the machines and the workers to operate them.
As the Industrial Revolution grew, private investors and financial institutions were needed to provide money for the further expansion of industrialization. Financiers and banks thus became as important as industrialists and factories in the growth of the revolution.
People started to invest large sums of money called capital investments in manufacturing factories and equipment.
A more modern term for investment in new enterprises, especially in high technology, is venture capital.
The investment of large sums of money was aided by the development of stock markets.
Historians have disagreed on the significance of the Industrial Revolution. Some have emphasized that the importance of the revolution was in the great increase in the production of goods. They argue that this increase did more during the 1800s to raise people's standard of living than all the actions of legislatures and trade unions.
Other historians have stressed the negative parts of the revolution. They point to the overcrowded and unsanitary housing and the terrible working conditions created by rapid industrialization in the cities.
Some historians have even denied that the Industrial Revolution was revolutionary, that is, a period of great and sudden changes. These scholars insist that the basic elements of the Industrial Revolution can be traced back to developments in Europe hundreds of years before the 1700s.
Today, most historians agree that the Industrial Revolution was a great turning point in the history of the world. It changed the Western world from a basically rural and agricultural society to a basically urban and industrial society.
Industrialization brought many material benefits, but it also created a large number of problems that still remain critical in the modern world. For example, most industrial countries face problems of air and water pollution.
Hunting and gathering.
A hunting and gathering society is any human society that depends on hunting, fishing, or the gathering of wild plants for subsistence.
Until about 12,000 years ago, all peoples were foragers of wild food. Hunting began about 600,000 years ago with Homo habilis.
There have been many differences between them. Some specialized in hunting big game, in trapping smaller animals, in fishing along coasts or in lakes or rivers, or in shellfish gathering, while others depended mostly on gathering wild vegetables, fruits, seeds, nuts, and berries.
Many peoples practiced hunting or gathering in some combination with agriculture or animal husbandry in pre-Columbian North America. For instance, the Indians of the Great Plains were pure hunters and food gatherers. Those of eastern North America were hunter-gatherers who secondarily practiced agriculture, and those of the American Southwest, Mexico, and Central America were agriculturists who supplemented their diet by hunting and gathering.
In the Old World at the same date, pure hunters and gatherers dominated only Australia and a few isolated areas in Africa, Southeast Asia and Siberia.
The hunting and gathering economy demands an extensive land area. It has been estimated that people who depend on such methods must have available from 18 to 1,300 square kilometers, 7 to 500 square miles, of land per capita, according to the local environmental conditions.
Permanent villages or towns are rarely possible, because the group is forced to move whenever the local supply of food begins to be exhausted.
Possessions are limited to what can be carried from one camp to another, and housing usually consists of simple huts, tents, or lean-tos made of plant materials or the skins of animals.
Social groups themselves must necessarily be small, since only a limited number of people can congregate together without quickly exhausting the food resources of the locality. Such groups are typically either individual family units or a number of related families collected together in a band,
where both hunting and gathering are practiced. The men usually hunt while the women gather plants and do most domestic chores. A sedentary lifestyle is possible for hunter-gatherers. However, where food supplies are unusually abundant and reliable and can be stored.
The Indians of the Pacific Northwest coast, for instance, relied on flour made from acorns and on smoke-dried salmon for food, and achieved both permanent villages and high population densities.
Because of the need for an extensive range for hunting and gathering, only very small groups of people could live together, perhaps no more than 10 to 20.
Contact with other groups was very limited and often hostile because of the competition for resources.
A nomadic existence was often necessary because of climate and/or exhaustion of resources.
No transfer of information or development of cities, that is civilization, was possible.
Cartoon, we need to have a shake-up.
An often stated quotation used to sum up life in the olden days was short, dirty, nasty, brutish, and boring.
Nasty, brutish and short aren't a firm of particularly unpleasant lawyers but a quotation from Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, or the matter, form, and power of a commonwealth, ecclesiastical and civil, 1651.
The fuller quotation of this phrase is even less appealing: solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Hobbes described the natural state of mankind, the state pertaining before a central government is formed, as a war of every man against every man. In the book he outlines the incommodities of such a war.
Horizontal ellipsis. Whatsoever therefore is consequent to a time of war, where every man is enemy to every man, the same is consequent to the time, wherein men live without other security, than what their own strength, and their own invention shall furnish them withal.
In such condition, there is no place for industry, because the fruit thereof is uncertain, and consequently no culture of the earth, no navigation, nor use of the commodities that may be imported by sea, no commodious building, no instruments of moving, and removing such things as require much force. No knowledge of the face of the earth. No account of time. No arts. No letters. No society. And which is worst of all, continual fear, and danger of violent death.
And the life of man? Solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short.
Life was short. The average lifespan was only 35 years.
Something's just not right. Our air is clean. Our water is pure. We all get plenty of exercise. Everything we eat is organic and free range. And yet nobody lives past 30. Quotation mark.
This is a chart of the average life expectancy over human history. It should be recognized, however, that much of this short life expectancy was due to the very high infant mortality rate.
This is a graph of the average life expectancy over human history. We note that there was very little change until the abrupt increase in life expectancy starting about 200 years ago.
This is another graph of the average life expectancy at birth over human history. We note again that there was very little change until about 200 years ago.
Life was short, dirty, nasty, brutish, and boring.
Life was short, dirty, nasty, brutish, and boring.
Life was boring. Very few people could read and even fewer could write. Even so, the few books available were very expensive.
And of course, there were no phonographs, radios, TVs, CD players, computers, or movies. All of that was in the far future.
We know now beyond question that industrial societies generate wealth, which eventually spreads widely to benefit all their people. Even though inequalities increase and even though the early stages of industrialization are often dirty, exploitative, and painful.
No other way out of collective poverty has yet been discovered.
Life before the Industrial Revolution. People were concerned with the most basic of primary economic activities. People acquired the necessities of survival from the land.
Society and culture were overwhelmingly rural and agricultural. Before 1700, virtually all manufacturing was carried on in two systems: cottage and guild industries, and both depended on hand labor and human power.
Cottage industries were most commonly practiced in farm homes and rural villages. They were usually a sideline to agriculture. Objects for family use were made in each household.
Most villages had a cobbler, miller, weaver, and smith who worked part-time at home. Skills were passed from parents to children.
Guild industries consisted of professional organizations of highly skilled, specialized artisans engaged full-time in their trades and based in towns and cities.
Guilds were fraternal organizations of artisans skilled in a particular craft, and membership came after a long apprenticeship.
Life before the Industrial Revolution. On the eve of the Industrial Revolution, less than 10% of the people of Europe lived in cities. The rest lived in small towns and villages scattered across the countryside. These people spent most of their working day farming. Unless they could sell surplus food in nearby towns, they grew little more than they needed for themselves.
The people in rural areas made most of their own clothing, furniture, and tools from raw materials produced on the farms or in forests.
Most manufacturing, however, took place in homes in rural areas. Merchants called entrepreneurs distributed raw materials to workers in their homes and collected the finished products. The entrepreneurs owned the raw materials, paid for the work, and took the risk of finding a market for their products. They often spread their operations to include workers in nearby villages. In the home, the whole family worked together making clothing, food products, textiles, and wood products. Workers themselves provided most of the power for manufacturing. Water wheels furnished some power.
The way of life differed from place to place, depending on the climate, the soil, and the distance from towns and trade routes. For most people, life revolved around the agricultural seasons, planting, cultivating, harvesting, and processing the harvest. The way of life changed little from one generation to the next, and most sons followed their father's trade.
Life was hard for most people. They lived under the constant threat that their crops might fail. Although few people starved, many of them suffered from malnutrition. As a result, they caught diseases readily, and epidemics were common. Most workers produced little and earned little. Only a few people enjoyed large incomes, usually because they owned land, held public office, or had succeeded in business. Little money was saved or invested in business ventures. In fact, there were few opportunities for investment.
Before the Industrial Revolution, most European countries were ruled by a monarch who had much personal power. Great landowners, rich merchants, and some members of the clergy also had considerable political influence. But the workers and farmers had no voice in the government. Many countries did not even hold elections. Although Great Britain had a parliament, only male members of the Church of England who paid a certain amount of taxes could vote. A handful of voters often determined who would represent a district in Great Britain. All these social, economic, and political conditions changed in Great Britain as the Industrial Revolution developed.
Historical significance of the Industrial Revolution. An ancient Greek or Roman would have been just as comfortable in Europe in 1700 because daily life was not much different, as agriculture and technology were not much changed in over 2,000 years.
The Industrial Revolution changed human life drastically. More was created in the last 250 years than in the previous 2,500 years of known human history.
When, where, why, and how did it begin?
If I had to pick a year as the beginning of the modern world, I would pick 1776. But why?
What happened in 1776? Well, three important things. 1. The American Revolution, a new idea about government and the relationship of people and government. And 2. Adam Smith and his book, The Wealth of Nations, new ideas about what wealth really is. And, I think most importantly of all, James Watt and the invention of a useful steam engine.
Who started it? Was it Galileo, Copernicus, Gutenberg, Newton, Da Vinci, Voltaire, Locke? Or Adam Smith?
It was a combination of need, invention, and ability to make.
Here's an example: the need for light. Then there was fireplaces, candles, kerosene lanterns, gas lights.
Now we have incandescent light bulbs, fluorescent lights, and LED lights.
Here's another example: the need for transportation. Then there was walking, animals, horses, mules, camels, etc., and riding carriages.
Now we have steam trains, diesel locomotives, automobiles, and airplanes. All these were essential elements: precision engineering and manufacturing, precision boring machines, high temperature and high strength materials metallurgy, and venture capital. This shows the estimated per capita world GDP over the past 2,000 years. We see very little change until around 1850 or 1900.
The worldwide per capita income for 7,000 years was only about $400 to $550 in 1990 dollars.
In 1 AD, the yearly income was $466, and by the year 1600, it had increased to only about $596.
A major advance in machine tools was Vaucanson's lathe in 1751. The 1751 machine that made everything. Jacques de Vaucanson.
The rocket locomotive was built in 1829.
The firm of Boulton and Watt was founded in 1775 to produce the first practical and efficient steam engines of James Watt.
John Wilkinson's cylinder boring machine was developed in 1775.
The history of machine tools.
This is a picture of Henry Maudslay by Grevedon.
It was a revolution like none other.
Was it like other revolutions like the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, etc.?
What was the political philosophy behind these revolutions?
For the American Revolution it was life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. For the French Revolution it was liberté, égalité, and fraternité. And for the Russian Revolution, from each according to his means, to each according to his needs. How about the Industrial Revolution?
For the Industrial Revolution, was there no philosophy? Was it just to make a buck? Perhaps.
What were the long-lasting effects on the lives of ordinary people of these political revolutions?
Who were the leaders of the revolution? What did the leaders advocate? And when did it begin and end?
The change.
The great discontinuity.
The Industrial Revolution can be thought of in more general terms, and perhaps more generally and correctly as a productivity revolution. It is the precipitous rise in productivity in almost every aspect of human endeavors that has given us the cornucopia of abundance, opportunities, and choices of the modern world.
This rise in productivity is due to the application of mechanical power as well as information power. Mechanical power from the use of steam engines, internal combustion engines, hydroelectric and wind power, and information or computational power from telegraphs, telephones, radio, and computers.
Never before have so many had so much.
We now work much smarter and faster than ever before in human history. On the farms, in factories, schools, and offices. Almost nothing is as it was before.
Thousands of years went by with very little change.
Then starting in the middle of the 18th century things started to change.
It was around 1750 that things really began to take off.
Even now, this pace of the change will likely continue unabated into the future decades.
On a time scale of over 5,000 years or more, and certainly the entire span of human existence on Earth, the change wrought by the Industrial Revolution would look more like this: a discontinuous change.
Some historians have used the term the Great Discontinuity to describe this very sudden change.
Introduction. Before the Industrial Revolution, Neolithic, or First Agricultural Revolution, steam power, iron, textiles, the Second Industrial Revolution, the Information Age, the Age of Silicon, Copper, and Glass. Summary. The Industrial Revolution was a period from the 18th to the 19th century where major changes in agriculture, manufacturing, mining, and transport had a profound effect on socio-economic and cultural conditions.
It started in the United Kingdom and then spread throughout Europe, North America, and eventually the world.
The Industrial Revolution, which transformed the world over the past in human history since the Neolithic Revolution, the discovery some 12,000 years ago that plants and animals could be domesticated.
Industrialization has created, on balance, a much safer world and one that supports larger populations with greater life expectancy than ever before.
Humanity has learned to make and distribute devices of increasing complexity, whose collective effect has been to make life longer, richer, safer, and more varied for us than for nearly all our predecessors on the planet.
The invention of power looms at the time of the Industrial Revolution dramatically increased the process of change from an agrarian, handicraft economy to one dominated by industry and machine manufacture.
This process began in England in the 18th century, and from there spread to other parts of the world.
Although used earlier by French writers, the term Industrial Revolution was first popularized by the English economic historian Arnold Toynbee to describe England's economic development from 1760 to 1840. Since Toynbee's time, the term has been more broadly applied.
The onset of the Industrial Revolution marked a major turning point in human history. Almost every aspect of daily life was eventually influenced in some way.
Two great economic revolutions occurred in human development.
The domestication of plants and animals occurred in our dim prehistory.
This ultimately resulted in a huge increase in human population, and greatly accelerated the modification of the physical environment, and resulted in development of cities and civilization.
The Industrial Revolution started in the 18th century and is still taking place today.
It involved a series of inventions, leading to the use of machines and inanimate power in the manufacturing process. Suddenly whole societies could engage in seemingly limitless multiplication of goods and services.
Rapid bursts of human inventiveness followed, as well as gigantic population increases.
Starting in the later part of the 18th century, there began a transition in parts of Great Britain's previously manual labor and draft animal-based economy towards machine-based manufacturing. It started with the mechanization of the textile industries, the development of iron-making techniques, and the increased use of refined coal.
Trade expansion was enabled by the introduction of canals, improved roads and railways. The introduction of steam power fueled primarily by coal, wider utilization of water wheels and powered machinery, mainly in textile manufacturing, underpinned the dramatic increases in production capacity.
In the late 18th century, British entrepreneurs began to build a canal system to link up the country's navigable rivers and to connect all its major cities so that bulk goods could be carried economically between them.
The development of all-metal machine tools in the first 2 decades of the 19th century facilitated the manufacture of more production machines for manufacturing in other industries.
The effects spread throughout Western Europe and North America during the 19th century, eventually affecting most of the world, a process that continues as industrialization. The impact of this change on society was enormous.
The first industrial revolution, which began in the 18th century, merged into the second industrial revolution around 1850, when technological and economic progress gained momentum with the development of steam-powered ships, railways, and later in the 19th century with the internal combustion engine and electrical power generation. The period of time covered by the Industrial Revolution varies with different historians. Eric Hobsbawm held that it broke out in Britain in the 1780s and was not fully felt until the 1830s or 1840s, while T.S. Ashton held that it occurred roughly between 1760 and
The conventional telling of history tended to report particular times and events, particularly on rulers, wars, and political events, rather than on the much more gradual technological and industrial developments. These were often accomplished by numerous nameless individuals whose identities are lost to history. It can be truly said that the Industrial Revolution did not get enough respect in these books.
The 3 principal areas of innovation. The commencement of the Industrial Revolution is closely linked to a small number of innovations made in the second half of the 18th century in steam power, iron production, and textile manufacturing.
Steam power. The improved steam engine invented by James Watt in 1776 was initially mainly used for pumping out mines, but from the 1780s was applied to power machines. This enabled rapid development of efficient semi-automated factories on a previously unimaginable scale in places where water power was not available.
In the iron industry, coke was finally applied to all stages of iron smelting, replacing charcoal.
Textiles. Cotton spinning was developed using Richard Arkwright's water frame, James Hargreaves' spinning jenny, and Samuel Crichton's spinning mule, a combination of the spinning jenny and the water frame.
The spinning jenny is a multi-spool spinning frame. It was invented around 1764 by James Hargreaves in England.
The device reduced the amount of work needed to produce yarn, with the worker able to work 8 or more spools at once. This grew to 120 spools as the technology advanced.
In the textile sector, such mills became the model for the organization of human labor in factories, epitomized by Cottonopolis, the name given to the vast collection of cotton mills, factories and administration offices based in Manchester.
Later the assembly line system greatly improved efficiency, both in this and other industries. With a series of men trained to do a single task on a product, then having it moved along to the next worker, the number of finished goods also rose significantly.
Technology transfer. Knowledge of new innovation was spread by several means. Workers who were trained in the technique might move to another employer or might be poached.
A common method was for someone to make a study tour, gathering information where he could. During the whole of the Industrial Revolution and for the century before, All European countries and America engaged in study touring. Some nations, like Sweden and France, even trained civil servants or technicians to undertake it as a matter of state policy.
In other countries, notably Britain and America, this practice was carried out by individual manufacturers anxious to improve their own methods. Study tours were common then, as now, as was the keeping of travel diaries. Records made by industrialists and technicians of the period are an incomparable source of information about their methods.
The printing press was invented in the Holy Roman Empire by the German Johann Gutenberg around 1440.
Another means for the spread of innovation was by the network of informal philosophical societies, like the Lunar Society of Birmingham, in which members met to discuss natural philosophy, that is science, and often its application to manufacturing. The Lunar Society flourished from 1765 to 1809, and it has been said of them, they were, if you like, the revolutionary committee of that most far-reaching of all the 18th century revolutions, the Industrial Revolution.
Other such societies published volumes of proceedings and transactions. For example, the London-based Royal Society of Arts published an illustrated volume of new inventions, as well as papers about them in its annual transactions.
There were publications describing technology. Encyclopedias such as Harris's Lexicon Technicum, 1704, and Dr. Abraham Rees's Cyclopedia, 1802 to 1819.
Rees's Cyclopedia of 1819 contained an enormous amount of information about the science and technology of the first half of the Industrial Revolution, well illustrated by fine engravings.
Other sources such as the Descriptions des Arts et Métiers and Diderot's Encyclopédie explained foreign methods with fine engraved plates.
A good example of technology transfer is the Great Exhibition of 1851. More than 14,000 exhibitors from around the world gathered in the palace's 990,000 square feet, 92,000 square meters, of exhibition space to display examples of the latest technology developed in the Industrial Revolution.
The Crystal Palace was a cast iron and glass building originally erected in Hyde Park, London, England, to house the Great Exhibition of 1851. Designed by Joseph Paxton, the Great Exhibition building was 1,851 feet, 564 meters, long, with an interior height of 128 feet, 39 meters. The Agricultural Revolution, also called the Neolithic Revolution at around 5000 BC, resulted in a great increase in the food supply.
This is a cartoon about Neolithic times.
This is another cartoon about Neolithic times.
This is another cartoon about Neolithic times.
Another cartoon about Neolithic times.
Your keys to a better life. Recommended video, The Machine That Made Us, Gutenberg Printing Press Documentary, Timeline, 59 minutes.
Recommended video, Savory Steam Engine, 3 minutes, 33 seconds.
Recommended video, Steam Engine, How Does It Work? 4 minutes, 49 seconds.
Recommended video, History of Machine Tools, 43 minutes, 47 seconds.
Table of contents.
Thanks for watching. This is continued in part 2.